So the first part I want to talk about briefly is environmental markets and what are they. We've spoken about a little bit today about markets and you've heard them mentioned in some of the speeches. But what are they? As Papa Sam said, you must have your customer before you can develop or before you can sell, before you can trade. You must have customers. And one of the things that you've got in Manus, being such a beautiful island with beautiful people and heritage and history and culture, is you have people that want to support those markets and want to support you. And it's an opportunity now to promote Manus and then bring people to you that want to do that. So at the moment, environmental markets around the world exist essentially for greenhouse gases, which we'll talk about more today, but also for water quality, water quantity, wetlands and habitats. And they're broadly grouped into ecosystem services that you may have heard that term before. But what does this mean for Manus? How do we promote Manus? As I said, you've got incredible history, incredible culture, and people want to be involved. Businesses now, for example, in Europe, when people buy their power, they pay extra money for their power, so their power is attached to an environmental offset. So they're not creating damage for the environment. Businesses around the world, for example, luxury brands like Prada have recently introduced bags where they're using recycled plastics. So who thought the bottle that you throw away and the plastic you throw away would get collected and be made into high fashion? Well, that's happening now because people around the world want to address these issues, these environmental issues. So environmental markets, or using environmental influence to grow the market, is an easy thing to do when the momentum is pushing that way. And at the moment, there's a unique situation where the momentum is certainly pushing that way. So the carbon markets around the world, which is what we're going to focus on a little bit more today, last year in 2018 were valued at $82 billion US. Now of that $82 billion US, unfortunately, there is a very big difference between what they used to call developed and developing, or Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries. So that means that only the developed countries have been participating in this market worth $82 billion. We'd like to change that, and we think Papua New Guinea can change that. And we'd like the help of all the government and the national government, obviously, to look at addressing that and starting to drive that back through the provinces, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So sustainability and environmental responsibility is continuing to increase and influence the marketing and branding of products. As I said, people pay more for power. Power companies like BP want to be involved in programs. You're talking about Total with the new oil and gas, or the potential oil and gas project, talking about being carbon neutral. Why do they want to be carbon neutral? Why do they want to have a bigger cost to their business? Because they want to be environmentally responsible. Okay, they want to be doing the right thing. There's what they call corporate social responsibility, where these large multinational companies, not all of them, some of them are just about making money and putting money back to their shareholders, but a lot of them now have a big push towards environmental responsibility. Customers that we've dealt directly with through the one or the pilot project we've established in East Sepik so far have been Qantas. You know, when you fly on the balloon, pardon me, when you fly on the plane and you can offset your emissions. If you elect to offset your emissions, about 1/3 of those offsets come from Papua New Guinea in the voluntary market. National Australia Bank, ANZ Bank, when those customers bought credits, the reason they bought their credits was because their employees, the people that work for them, said, we want to do something good for the environment. We just don't want to be a banker that sits here and counts the money and lends and borrows and all the other things that go with it. We want to be environmentally responsible and we want to do something for the environment. And that push is getting stronger and stronger in the developed world. And ACO Energy and Trade, they're a trade company in Europe from the Netherlands. They're a government-owned entity and they buy the credits, so when they sell their power, people can elect to pay a premium to have their power offset. So they're buying carbon neutral or carbon reduced power. Ellen's link letters, lawyers, and again through the Qantas Futures Planets program. So we've been very, very fortunate to attract those, and there are others, but of course you can only list so many, and I haven't used their logos because I never asked permission, so that's why I put their names there. So what's caused this? Well, I'll just take you back a little bit through the history of why this has eventuated. So you've all heard of global warming, and what's happening with global warming is that the Earth's getting hotter. So if you think of the atmosphere like a blanket that covers the Earth, as we're putting more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere through burning of fossil fuels largely, transport, other things, that blanket's getting thicker. So as the sun comes in, and where it would normally radiate back out of the Earth's atmosphere, it can't get out because the blanket's too thick. So it's staying in here, and the Earth's getting hotter. And the biggest thing that's causing is sea level temperatures are starting to rise because the polar ice caps on each end of the globe, North Pole, South Pole, are starting to melt at very, very alarming rates. And where's that water go? There's only so many oceans in the world, and all of a sudden you've already seen here your islands getting swallowed up by the water. As sea levels rise, they take the low-lying islands first. So the other impacts, severity of storms. You've seen more severe storms than ever before. You've seen things like malaria moving further up into the highlands of Papua New Guinea than it used to go. You see things like fruits, bananas growing further up than they used to grow because the earth is becoming hotter. If you look through all of the, in Europe right now, it's about 45 degrees in Europe. They've never have it that hot. That's a heat wave, and people dying over there from the heat. So it's definitely the contribution that man made man's influence on this through the emissions that we've created. It's beyond any doubt at all scientifically that we are contributing to global warming. Who's contributing to global warming? Well, PNG contributes around about 0.02% to global warming. So you don't contribute very much, but you see the problems firsthand. Firsthand you have the problems here. Even though you didn't cause it, you have the effects. So it's a matter of us working together to try and find solutions for this. So what is the carbon cycle? So the natural carbon cycle, has this got a pointer on it? So if you can see on this left side here, naturally you're going to burn fossil fuels, agriculture, deforestation, plant respiration. That happens naturally. But what happens here also naturally is we absorb carbon. We absorb it through the forests, in the grasslands, back into the soil and through our oceans. But at the moment, the problem is, as we're producing more carbon than we can store, it's got to go somewhere, and that's going to our atmosphere. And we're calling it carbon, but it's a number of greenhouse gases. So that's going, so we're unable to store as much as we want to, as we need to. So what are some of the solutions? So at the moment, globally, deforestation, cutting diwa, is somewhere around about 20, I'll use some estimates, about 20% of global greenhouse gases come from deforestation. And there was a great big outcry the other day because Brazil is losing the size of one soccer pitch every minute to deforestation. So when you think about that, how much gets lost in a day, and you number the number of minutes in a day, it's an incredible number. But it's not fair for someone to sit back, or a developing nation, or even nations to sit back and say, you can't develop your country. PNG has 15 million hectares of forests. It's not fair to someone say you can't develop it, because they've developed their countries, and that's how they made their money in a lot of the first instances, through agriculture. So the solution that's come up through the UN meetings, and people like Professor Cullivan have been working on this since the early 90s, and his colleagues, and a number of other people from around the world, has been to try and work on a way to make countries that have the carbon stores and can store more carbon of value. So this is about putting value on your forests, putting value on your seagrasses, your mangrove systems, your natural resources. But make it very, very clear, you don't cut them, you keep them. So we count the numbers, or we count the forest, and then we sell the numbers. Does that make sense, everyone? You count the seagrass, you count how much carbon, and then you sell the number. You keep it here. You're paid to keep your forests, to keep your natural resources, your seagrass areas intact. You're paid not to exploit them. So you have a choice. You can go down a path and look at agriculture, and it's very important to do that. Look at forestry, that's important as well, or you have a choice of conservation. So, where is carbon stored in the forest? So in the forest, you see the tree and the carbon stored in the tree, and they call this, everything above the ground is called the above ground biomass, and below the ground is below ground biomass. So if you think of photosynthesis, what happens? The trees breathe in carbon dioxide and they give out oxygen. Where does the carbon go? It stays in the tree. Okay, so that's the simplest way to think about it. You breathe in carbon dioxide, which is CO2, and you give out oxygen, which is O2. The carbon stays in there, and you're absorbing that, and that's stored in that tree, in that forest, under the ground, in the oceans. So what's blue carbon? You've probably heard a little bit about it. What does it mean? So blue carbon is in coastal vegetation, so mangroves, tidal marshes that you don't have here, and seagrasses. So those marine ecosystems can sequester 2 to 4 times more blue carbon than terrestrial forests, because they're a much more efficient store of that carbon once they've captured it. So mangroves and seagrasses are the habitats on Manus, obviously, and I think Regina shared with us yesterday the size of mangroves, about a couple of square kilometres, but over 2,000 square kilometres of seagrasses. So you have an important habitat there. You also know that habitat's very important for the ecology of your oceans, of your reefs, because a lot of animals breed there. The fish, prawns, etc., grow there when they're young, so they're very important to protect. And now we're looking at there's developed ways to have countries provide you financial reasons to keep those areas conserved. Okay, so they're not saying don't keep them for nothing. We're all about making a commercial way, finding commercial solutions for you to keep those areas saved. So just some little notes about how important blue carbon can be, because I think it's pretty pertinent here. Coastal wetlands sequester enough carbon to offset 1 billion barrels of oil. This is how important these habitats are to us. 726 tonnes of coal can be offset by 1 hectare of mangroves. It's a lot of carbon, isn't it, when you think about just what sort of a job these environments do. So seagrasses can store twice the average of a terrestrial forest, not necessarily your tropical rainforest, but terrestrial forests. So what's this about? This is about creating a balance. So for example, the people that produce the emissions, mining companies, oil and gas companies largely that produce the emissions, will have to buy credits to become neutral or reduce their position. And then obviously that money gets paid. Then the people that create the credits provide the credits, and then they're paid for that, which finances these projects. And I'll show you some examples of this in a second. So then the provincial government looks at an enabling framework, so people that have produced these emissions must offset them. And this is something where we're working with the national government to want to see them engage more. And for example, Australia, who will need in the vicinity of millions of tonnes of credits, PNG can be a source of those credits, and they can sell those credits. In Australia, they're paying around about $12 a tonne. In New Zealand, they're paying about $25 a tonne. And there's a very real opportunity for Papua New Guinea to be a source of those credits for them. So where does it start? It starts with land use planning. This is an example of one of the areas we've worked with. So you don't have to look at saying everything must be conserved, you can't have development. No, you can have any development you want. We simply survey the areas where there's going to be activity out from that. So if there's a mine, it's fine, survey that out. If there's already projects underway, that's okay too. Just survey those areas out. Because it's a choice. It's an opt-in, not have to opt out. You have to say yes, you want to be involved in that. So we start with a bottom-up approach, where we look at the areas and we look at the resource and we define the resource. Probably an important point to tell, since the last presentation was talking about profit sharing or benefit sharing, the model that the PNG national government's endorsed is 60% is to landowners. Not 10, not 2, not 3, 60% goes to landowners. So it's unique, it's your resource, it's naturally there. We have to measure it, we have to look after it, you have to preserve it, you're the custodians of it, and 60% of that revenue comes to you as landowners. And then it's about 20/20 for us and the government after taxes. So a bottom-up approach to land use planning. And so then with red, identifying the areas, we look just at a red project, and blue carbon's the same. So again, we'd map out those areas, identify the areas, communities that want to be involved. And then the income from those projects are used to develop other opportunities. For example, renewable energy. The renewable energy is well and truly enough now to be a project on its own for Manus Province. But for now, looking at renewable energy, and here's an example of where in the April Solomon project, we've distributed solar lights to all of those villages that never had any lights in those areas. Now this is on the other side of the Sepik River between there and the mountains, so very, very remote, no roads, only access via river, no power, and now these areas and health centres and schools have solar lights. Ecotourism, conservation, as you start to promote this and start to market what Manus is doing, people will want to come and see it. You can got incredible opportunities for ecotourism. You drive past and the beauty of Manus is incredible. You've got diving, fishing, surfing, coastal walks. It's endless. Sustainable agricultural activities. So this is one we've done in Western Province with Tenure Development Foundation, and also we've got this happening with our own program in East Sepik Province. So we're growing eaglewood. So that again, the income from the project comes in and goes back to the local communities and they decide what they want to do. In this instance, they want to look at sustainable agriculture, and so we've established plantations for them where we're growing eaglewood seedlings. We've distributed about 500,000 of these in Western Province and about 15,000 of them in April Solomon. And what's about this too is we've got a distillation unit that at the moment is with the university. So we now want to distill the oil from the eaglewood and create value and add value to the products. So it's not just selling to someone, to a trader, who's then going to go and sell to someone else and then it will eventually be down at the end of the line. We're trying to distill those products now to create the most value for the local people and create industry, create opportunities. So this was just you might be interested in this. That's inoculating it, drilling the tree, inoculating it, and then you can see the eaglewood formed in there and coming out. This is us doing inspections to see. Of that, every single one of those trees that was inoculated had eaglewood. Naturally, maybe 2 or 3%. With here, every single one of them had eaglewood in them. So we know the program works. So again, just to reiterate, it's about a balance, creating a natural balance. So people that produce the emissions in Papua New Guinea, and for example, ExxonMobil produce probably somewhere in a bit over 10 million tonnes of emissions, but they don't buy one offset in Papua New Guinea. Around the world, they buy over 10 million tonnes of offsets, but none here because there's no obligation. We're hopeful that the national government will change that, and the provincial government can look at that too. So for example, you have, let's just look at the 2 projects that seems to be pretty topical. You have the asylum seeker program, and you potentially have a Navy program developing. The people running those understand about offsetting, and you can ask them to be carbon neutral and buy their credits from Manus. So the provincial government develops that enabling framework to say that they want to have carbon neutral products or programs running in their country, and you can then sell them the credits that are generated from your projects. As with everything, shared philosophies as the programs run through, important to have project partners, and consent and legal tenure. Can you see how that starts at the bottom here? Stakeholder engagement first, awareness, then to the district, then LLG, administrators, governors and NEC. So it's a bottom-up approach. You must have an enabling framework first, but once that's established, starting with the people and then working up. And this is examples of us out in the villages doing the awareness, and that booklet there has got the same pictures in that the gentleman's showing them, explaining it telling the villagers what it is, letting them understand what it is so they can make free, prior and informed choices of what it is they want to do. Field work, measuring out in the field again, using local people, and no different for the blue carbon, exactly the same. You see here the metre by metre square to measure the forest floor, exactly the same in the oceans. So that's essentially all that I've got to say. It's a great opportunity for the province to consider. On this scale, I think it probably needs to be at a provincial level where people can opt into it, because a small area is very expensive to monitor, to manage, but as a province you can reduce those costs significantly because it's done through remote sensing. It's an opportunity for you to look at a way to commercialise your natural resources in a non-extractive way. You don't have to cut MD wild. You don't have to get rid of seagrasses. You protect them. So you're paid to protect the environment. As we said, we count them and then we trade the numbers. You keep the DY, you keep the seagrasses, you keep your environment. And then, as income comes in, whatever the decision might be, maybe the future fund portion goes there. Maybe it goes to different programs. Different people want different programs in the areas. That's fine. You decide how you want to work through that program. So thank you very much. I just wanted to share that with you, and thank you for the opportunity.